Hello and welcome to the University of Nottingham. Today I'm joined by Tom O'Loughlin, and since we were last in this studio together, you have published a new book on the topic of foot washing. So Tom, tell me a bit more about foot washing and what led you to write this particular book.
Well, of all of the scenes that one finds in the four canonical Gospels, one of the most curious is the scene in the long final meal in John's Gospel, where in the middle of dinner, Jesus gets up and he washes the feet of the others at table. And this has a curious ending because there is a plural command. As I have done to you, ye do to one another. And these plural commands are quite unusual in the Gospels. You know, there's the one, baptize ye, do baptism. Then there's another one, do ye this in memory of me. And one has become baptism and is taken for granted by Christians. The other has become a central part of the Eucharistic rite. But the foot washing
Hasn't quite taken off, no.
Yeah, it has never taken off. Moreover, it's curious because it is copied by lots of different Christian groups, but whenever they do it, they always try to find ways to minimize it. So, for instance, they turn it from being something they do regularly into something they do once a year. Then they make it optional. Then they make it a token. They drop a tiny drop of water onto one foot. And it's almost like this is something they don't want to do.
That could be the case.
Well, yes, and of course there lies part of the wonder of this. I was reading about an actor who was taking part in a play and he had to wash someone's feet. So he heard that there was a foot washing in the local Catholic cathedral, and he went in and he said he was actually shocked. They had so removed it from the messiness and reality that they turned it into a joke. And that led me to say, well, what would it have been like? And of course, foot washing was very common in the ancient world, but it was the task of the lowliest servant in the household. It is the utter state of being on the bottom rung.
Civility, isn't it?
It's yes, and it's not only a slave's job, it's a female slave's job. It's double bottom. But yet it's also part of the memory of Jews and Christians that it is the sign of welcome, service, and being helpful to one another. So there's the story in Genesis of the strange visitors that come to see Abraham, and Abraham offers to have their feet washed. This is a sign that he presents himself as welcoming them and also serving them. And then in the Septuagint, the translation made a couple of centuries before the time of Jesus, Abraham himself offers to wash their feet, emphasizing his humility. And in John's Gospel, what foot washing has taken on is that this is to be the model of the relationships between the disciples to one another. In the synoptic tradition, it just comes across as a command. The last shall be first and the first shall be last. They must be servants of one another. But in John, there's actually a performance. They actually have to live through the reality of washing each other's feet. And then curiously, since it's not one of them should wash, but each should wash each other's feet, each must be servants of one another, it's a new modelling of the internal relationships of the church that John places at the very heart of his gospel. that then to a historian leads to a second question. If John places it at the very centre of his gospel, and the Christian churches feel they have to imitate it, why do they then try to minimise it? And the minimising takes an interesting form. They turn it from being an actual service of one another into being a mime of Jesus. So you have the medieval form where the king or the bishop or the pope or the local leader puts, as it were, says, oh, this is how I'd like you to see me. But of course, it's really just a mime. It's not actual real service. And there's a survival of that still in the Maundy money, where the foot washing is actually replaced by a little cash gift.
Traditionally on the same day, of course.
Traditionally on the same day. Or instead of seeing it as the relationship of one to another, it becomes the ruler slumming it for a moment and just becomes a sign of humility. But miming is not what John intends. John doesn't say, do this in memory of Jesus. He says, do this to remember who you are to one another. So miming is itself a confusion, and the humility tag is itself missing the central point. It's not, I am a ruler, but I will also be humble, but that in the Christian community, everyone must be the servant of everyone else.
So what's your solution, having said what's wrong with the
Well, I think the
tradition?
solution is that down the centuries, while foot washing has been dodged and minimised, in community after community, whether it be monastic communities or communities of churches of the Reformation, they have actually rediscovered foot washing as a very powerful way of symbolising how they see themselves relating to one another. And there's a very interesting example of that in just the last couple of decades in the L'Arche communities of Jean Vanier. Jean Vanier, aware how easy it would be for his communities to become two tiers, servants served, leaders led, so insisted that they should understand themselves through foot washing. And he has also developed it in that when he addressed the World Council of Churches some years ago, he had all the different rulers of the different churches, and he said, right, the way you will learn to relate to one another is not to talking theology, but to have a foot washing. So it's the rediscovery of a better interpretation of John's Gospel, a way of understanding how the Christian liturgy can often serve purposes crucially at odds with the very rites they are performing, and also it is a ritual that has much potential even for today, for a community to actually sit down, maybe just once a year, and actually wash each other's feet, and so establish a new sense of their own identity.
So your proposal in your book there explains all this and also gives practical directions about how to go about it in the modern day.
Yes, I wrote several articles, and then people said, oh, you've got to put it all together. So I realised that article after article that there was too much in it, and then someone came and said, well, write a book. So I did.
That size. Great. Well, we recommend this to everyone that's interested in foot washing, and happy feet. Thank you very much, Tom.
Thanks, Frances.
Thanks.